Have you ever wondered what it's like to cover video games for a decade? I have. I wondered it a lot when I was younger. Growing up in the heyday of video game coverage and E3 extravaganzas, I regularly contemplated what it must be like for people to be so tuned in with games for so many years. Then, before I realized it, I'd done it myself. I've been in the trenches of making videos out of games for over a decade now, and I've come to realize just how much it's messed with my brain and my ability to just enjoy a game for fun. This August, it'll have been 11 years that Joe and I have been posting videos on the channel where we formally discuss our time with a game. We've spent most of the last decade making video content in some form or another out of just about every major AAA game release that's hit, and if we haven't been making content out of it, we've still been playing them. It wasn't until I started writing this that I realized just how many games we've played and how many of them we've covered. We've discussed 122 games in official video form since August 2013. And if we haven't been talking about them, we've still been playing them. Damn near all of them, in fact. I've been keeping accurate track of every new game I've played since January 2014, so a decade now, and it's a lot. 443 games and counting. That is a stupid number of games. Recently, there's been this fatigue growing for the two of us, more so for Joe, but I'll admit I've been feeling it too. We've discussed it at length on recent episodes of the podcast, The Tower, and our Best of 2023. The short version is, we're starting to feel like we've been there and done that, and feel like games, especially big games, but also indies, are too often offering experiences that we've had before and we've had better. In the last month or so, something has struck me about this fatigue. I've really come to realize about myself that if I'm not making content with a game, my brain really struggles to connect to that game I'm playing. There are rare exceptions, of course. Baldur's Gate 3 was an excellent recent example of something I just played for the fun of it. But by and large, a slow and steady change has been occurring in my brain. What started as Mythbusters brain, aka how do we go about potentially doing myths in a given game, has transformed into content coverage brain. How's the photo mode in this latest release, and does the camera work in a way that'll allow me to make a beauty video? If I'm liking a game, where might I put it on my top 10 list at the end of the year, or where would I place it on the tower? How can I articulate my enjoyment to Joe and to you, the audience, on a game I like or dislike? What's an interesting gimmick this game has that could result in a fun and unique standalone video, and how could I go about executing that idea? Don't get me wrong, I love doing this and I wouldn't trade it for anything. It's fun solving problems presented by games, figuring out how to bring ideas to life, and seeing people enjoy the final videos. But even though I may love the final videos I end up making, this content brain mentality sort of hinders my ability to enjoy games just for the pleasure the game itself offers. Take Horizon Forbidden West, for example, a game I thoroughly enjoyed, but throughout my 100 hours with it, I was constantly thinking about how I could make a beauty video for it. I have to showcase my appreciation for the artistry here by doing justice with a great video. I have to make a follow-up beauty video to Zero Dawn because that was the beginning of the whole beauty video series. No one was forcing me to do any of this. I had just gotten attached to the idea that content had to be made with this game. After beating the game, I'd then go on to spend like 50 hours in the span of 4 or 5 days making that beauty video from start to finish. The end result is something I remain extremely proud of, despite it being rather difficult to make. I think I did it all justice, as I'd set out to, but my ability to enjoy that game for the pleasure of just playing it was tainted from start to finish by my content brain, and when I was done making that video, I could hardly even look at it, let alone play it. Even now, 2 years later with the PC release, something I anticipated a great deal and expected to immediately fall back into replaying, I have been unable to enjoy because ultimately I've already made content in that game. Why spend all this time playing something for fun when I could be playing something else for content? Perhaps worse than getting attached to just a video idea is getting attached to game developers and their franchises. When you spend over a decade following games with an extreme dedication, especially during the transition from young adulthood to old miserable adulthood, you inevitably end up with some nostalgic admiration for amazing, formative game experiences of your younger days. The worst thing that can happen is when I get attached to a video idea that is also attached to one of these formative franchises or studios, and their fall from grace. I have, over the years, found myself going down this dreary rabbit hole more than once. A game comes out from a studio that made some of my favorite games, and I realize that I have to, with utter commitment, play the entire game to know if it really is as bad as they say. And I am driven to do so by also knowing that I can make some content from my suffering. Joe will cackle at me going on a rant about playing all of Anthem, you the viewers will share your takes on how wrong I am about The Last of Us Part 2, and I will ultimately sleep better after the whole bad dream has been pushed out of my head and into the world. All of this is to say that, unfortunately for me and for you, this video is actually about Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League and why I played all of it.
Suicide Squad! Fuck you!
One thread that's woven itself through the last 10 years of me, YouTube, and gaming is the strange love of the messy live service game release. Starting with Destiny back in 2014, I found not only a profoundly flawed game with a tremendous core gameplay loop that essentially pushed a new style of game out into the world, for better and for worse, but I also found a game that occupied my thoughts constantly. Most of the time, this was negative. I would wonder, how could they make these decisions? How could a game come out this great and this terrible? How could they fix it? How will they make it great? And it's gone on like this for basically the last decade with Destiny. Destiny would be great, and then it would be terrible, and then it would be great, and then it would be terrible, and then it would be great again. Then Destiny 2 would come out and do all of the same things. Then The Division and The Division 2 would follow similar courses. Eventually, the real darkness descended with Anthem. A game I played in its entirety purely for the fascination of how the hell did something like this come out of BioWare, and how do I put these exasperated and confused thoughts into a video? It all felt like it came to a head for me last year with Redfall. Before I continue, no offense is meant by any of this to all those who worked on Redfall and are now unemployed. You deserved better. The entire Redfall situation has just been a very sad thing to watch. With that said, Redfall is, to this day, the single worst game I have ever beaten. It is a truly staggering disaster of a video game, and one that I played from start to finish because I desperately had to know how they went from Prey, one of the best games of all time, to such a sad husk of a game. And worst of all, I knew I had to make videos out of it. I had to see it all through, and I had to share this with the world. And I did. I made a video on Redfall, I put it on the Facebook page, and for quite some time I was convinced we would be ranking it on the tower because Joe insisted he would also play it. I even built a special place on my tower set specifically for Redfall, but ultimately, and perhaps for the better, Joe wisely never touched it, and we both moved on with our lives. With Redfall, I really thought I was done doing this to myself. I was done suffering these terrible games just so that I could know, so that I could have an opinion, and so that I could put that opinion in a video that would get viewed. And I really thought I had escaped this hell when Suicide Squad came out. It reviewed poorly, and looked to be yet another tragic entry in the long and storied history of developers failing to learn from others' mistakes and chase a live service golden goose that simply does not exist anymore. I watched from the sidelines and determined I was going to live a happier life and never touch it. But the more time that passed, the more a dark seed of thought kept growing in my cursed brain. I loved the Batman games. Arkham Asylum and Arkham City are two of the all-time great Xbox 360 games I deeply loved. And while I wasn't overly enthused with Arkham Knight, it is still a great game that I enjoyed from start to finish. Could it really be possible that the same studio that has shipped some of the best games of all time has had 9 years between releases and they shipped this sad live service failure? It was in the middle of April that I realized that despite all my efforts, I had to know. I've been doing this for too long. I've followed this studio and their games for too long. I've been suffering through these bad games to make videos for too long. And so I bought Suicide Squad, and now I have played it all because I just had to know. And you know what? I really have to say, those reviews and comments I saw saying that there was good stuff in the game, hints of something greater, that the game was really not that bad, that there was fun to be had in there, they were all truly wrong. Suicide Squad fucking sucks. I'm sorry to say it. It's just so boring from start to finish. I know boring is such a simple way to deride something, but man, I don't know what else to say. The game is just profoundly, eye-wateringly, skull-numbingly boring. Right from the opening, the game is bored with itself. There's next to zero context or setup for what is happening in the game. You're just thrown into this ridiculously long-winded tutorial that explains about 40 different gameplay mechanics in the span of 20 minutes, and before I had any clue how we'd gotten to an interdimensional giant alien ship invading Metropolis, the game is off and running and there's no looking back. I'll come back to story stuff in a bit. For now, I want to focus on the gameplay and loot. Suicide Squad is a looter-shooter live service game, the bane of all of our existences at this point, but I do want to say I don't have any major issues with the core idea of a looter-shooter live service game. When they are infrequent and done well, there is something there. As I said, I've been playing Destiny for over a decade and expect to continue to do so well beyond the final shape, unless it's terrible, but even then, I'll of course be back. But for one of these games to even begin to have a chance at succeeding and finding an audience big enough to warrant long-term support like Destiny has seen, it needs the most important of core pillars: fun gameplay. I've stuck around with Destiny for this long because, more than any of its other strengths, it is just fun to play. Every single thing about it feels incredible. It's something I really take for granted after all this time, but they just nailed the fundamental requirements for making a first-person shooter feel good. The way guns fire and enemies react to them, the diversity of enemies and their attacks, the ease with which you can read an enemy silhouette and plan the order you want to attack things in, the cooldown cadence of melee, grenade, and super, the movement and traversal, it goes on and on. Destiny is so satisfying to play, even after 10 years and a couple thousand hours with it. Suicide Squad is not satisfying to play. Here you have an overly convoluted mishmash of shooting, movement, breaking enemy resistances, juggling and hitting them to get shields back, powerful abilities that play the game for you, enemies with zero legibility, a million different screen effects blocking everything, and none of it is ever satisfying. I'm sure watching the gameplay here, you'll struggle to ever tell what is happening due to the sheer volume of effects popping off at all times, but also because every enemy looks the same, every attack is the same, every type of gun is the same, and so on and so on. You shoot, the enemy dies, that's it. You throw a grenade, it explodes, the enemy dies, that's it. You hit your special ability button, take your hands off the keyboard, have a sip of water while the animation plays out and the damage numbers overwhelm your visual cortex, and the enemies die, that's it. That's the game, from start to finish. It never evolves, it never changes, it never gets more fun or satisfying or challenging. By hour 2, you've seen every single gameplay option the game has, and it only gets less involved and less satisfying as you play more and become stronger. By the end game, where I was running around high difficulty missions, my eyes were completely glazed over because of how devoid of challenge and thought the combat had become. I was just chucking grenades, hitting my ability cooldown, shooting guys, spamming attacks, all of it completely mindlessly because there's no need to think about any of it at all and no challenge to any of it. Perhaps worse than the combat being so repetitive is the fact that everything in the game is so repetitive. Maybe the most shocking thing to me in playing this was the fact that the entire game, from start to finish, even into the end game, is made up of the same 3 or 4 missions. You are either defending an objective, escorting a vehicle, blowing up defenses, or miniaturizing friendlies and throwing them into some sort of Fortnite battle bus. That's it. That's every story objective, that's every side objective, that's every endgame mission. Then when it comes time to do one thing different, aka kill a member of the Justice League, you simply run around an area depleting their shield with counterattacks, having no sense of progress or challenge or threat in fighting enemies like, I don't know, fucking Superman, and then after doing that for about 5 minutes, they die in a cutscene. That's how every single boss fight works, with the exception of the Batman fight where you just shoot a big imaginary projection of him off in the distance until a weak point opens up and then he dies in a cutscene. I am sorry to you watching this. As an editor, I really like to try and keep the footage as varied as possible in videos to keep you as engaged as I can, but holy fuck, every single second of footage I have for this game looks exactly the same. Here's what it looks like 2 hours into the game. Here's what it looks like 12 hours into the game. If you think it's boring to watch, let me tell you, it's way worse to play. Every hour of playtime in this feels like 5 hours. It's so dull. After beating the game, putting another 90 minutes or so into the endgame, and then closing the game, I was genuinely shocked to see that Steam said I only had 11.6 hours of playtime in it, because it truly felt like I'd play this for like 30 or 40 hours, and that's how repetitive and dull every single second of it was. This dullness was only amplified by the game's other core pillar, loot. We all know what a great loot ramp looks like. You start off with the simple white tier weapons that introduce you and acclimate you to the combat. Then as you level up, you start getting increasingly better rewards. A green drops and you replace that white weapon. There's maybe one small new effect on the green weapon, and that's a little bit exciting. Then a blue drops sometime later. Eventually you have purples dropping and it's exciting. And then even later you see gold items drop and it's completely ridiculous, and everything starts to feel game-breakingly overpowered compared to those early hours. That's what makes loot satisfying. You ramp up into the craziness of it and slowly feel like you're breaking the game. What Suicide Squad instead does is give you gold tier weapons about 2 hours into the game, which completely nullifies all the other gear that is also dropping. By hour 3, I had 2 gold weapons that were so powerful I was able to use them for the next 7 hours straight, because not one single weapon was better. It was only near the end of the game that I finally got some new weapons that were stronger than those I'd gotten at hour 3, and I finally retired them. Think about that though. For 7 straight hours, the loot did not matter. I cannot tell you how boring this made playing through the game. For 7 hours, nothing changed. I went into the same 4 missions with the same 2 weapons and fought the same generic purple enemies for loot that didn't matter. I'll be completely honest here, I really didn't think I was going to beat this game. I had written an extra chunk for this video about the fact that I didn't even beat the game but still managed to make a video out of it. It would have been a fun little introspective and comparative moment of me wondering if I really am any better than those developers and publishers themselves. If they can ship an unfinished game and charge money for them, why should I finish playing them in order to make a video that I'll make money from? Unfortunately for me, my brain is stupid and I beat the entire game. I killed the whole Justice League and I lived to tell the tale. I watched as these characters, whom I knew nothing about except for Harley Quinn, went around Metropolis, which I knew nothing about except it's where Superman is from, and killed a bunch of superheroes that I didn't have any attachment to except for Batman. And they made their jokes and had their fun, and I just sat through it all and felt nothing. At every serious moment, the game would play the same trick and interrupt the moment with a joke from one of the characters, and all the drama of having just murdered Batman or Superman would vanish.
And so the Flash has expired. He saved our lives, yet we ended his. As honorable warriors, we will show proper respect to this fallen hero by...
Show a little class, man. Holy shit. Congratulations.
Makes sense. The gods have cursed you in every other way.
I will give credit where credit is due. Once or twice the game got some chuckles out of me, I will admit it, and all the way through the cutscenes in the game, of which there are a huge amount of, are lovingly crafted with well-realized characterizations, attentive and meticulous animation work, and great performances from the entire cast. Kevin Conroy is having a blast playing evil Batman. Tara Strong remains like the perfect Harley Quinn. Samoa Joe is in there and he was great as King Shark. I had no idea until the credits rolled. And Deborah Wilson absolutely kills it as Amanda Waller. God, she is so good in everything. But the story, despite the care it receives in these areas, is so underbaked, so shoddily strung together that there was no way for me to get attached to any of it. The only times I ever perked up in my chair were when the game was pointing at the incredible, generation-defining Batman Arkham games and saying, "Hey, remember how great these games were?" And I would think to myself, yeah, I do remember. Then later when Batman is killed, it felt like the studio themselves were just saying, yeah, those games were good, but fuck them. We're in a new age and you're a fool for ever having cared. And you know what? They might just be right. It's cynical and depressing to say it, but at the end of the day, games are a product first and art second. Now more than ever, a game must make money. So much money. More money than the last one. And if it doesn't, then they just shoot it in the fucking head and try again with someone else. In a lot of ways, Suicide Squad feels like the culmination of all the bad trends gaming has gone down these last 10 years. A once great studio having shipped beloved single-player games is now reduced to having made a game for money above all else. A game meant to suck dollars out of you with addictive, simple mechanics. A game devoid of content that they charged full price for, included battle passes in, stuffed with copious overpriced microtransactions, and kicked out the door to make money. They torched and burned all the goodwill they'd spent the last 15 years accumulating in pursuit of profit, because that is what their corporate overlords wanted, and it's the only thing that matters. Clearly, aspects of Suicide Squad were made with care, and I have no doubt that those who worked on it for so long wanted to make a great game and are proud of the work they did, and they should be. I have no idea how hard it is to make a game, but by all accounts, it sounds damn near impossible. But I am also confident that this is not where they wanted to end up, but it was inevitable because stock prices must forever rise, and making one game that monetizes people for years and years is far easier to sell to people in the business suits than a single-player game that people play once. So where does this all leave me and everything else? I really don't know anymore. It's naive to think this won't happen again. Of course it will. It's inevitable that more great studios will fall because capitalism must climb ever upwards until there is nothing left for anyone. And of course, I am almost certainly going to fall down another bad idea rabbit hole and make content out of it. At the end of the day, I'm taking away the worst lessons from all of this. Obviously, I don't want more terrible, depressing live service farts to release, but also, I kinda do. My content brain loves this. If I could make a video like this a few times a year, I would sleep better every night. I've gotten more mental exercise out of making this video and playing 12 hours of fucking Suicide Squad than I've gotten out of most of the games and videos of the last few years. I have not yet learned my lesson, and neither have the companies publishing these games. There have been more than enough examples in the last decade of how not to do this, and yet, seemingly every year now, another one of these games comes out and another once great studio falls apart. Worst of all for me is that every time it's happened in the last decade, I have found myself there playing them and feeling mentally engaged at the end of the hours of miserable boredom I suffer to see them through. Oh god, I don't know what this says about the industry and my time with it, aside from I think it's all rather broken. Oh well, only 2 more weeks until the final shape comes out. Yay!